All right. So, for my project organizational behavior, my analysis is going to be on the movie Halo: The Fall of Reach. Now, this one is a little bit interesting. Most people wouldn't think twice to choose a movie usually based off of a book that ultimately derives from a video game, but I'm a little bit different. I personally would like to actually step outside and talk to you guys specifically on how this pulls in from a business aspect and pulling what happens here in the actual movie. Now, unfortunately, due to copyright reasons, I am not allowed to actually have the movie being played, so I'm just going to use gameplay from the actual game itself. Some of you might think, wait a minute, Mr. Business, what does this have to do with anything? Well, let's go about the diversity. So with my thesis specifically, though, it portrays three different military organizations. Programs, I should say. One is going to be the UNSC, or United Nations Space Command, ONI, Office of Naval Intelligence, and the Spartan 2 program. Spartan 2 program is gonna be the big thing that's gonna be focused on, solely because it's gonna be showing the development of one specific Spartan known as John 117, or as they're also commonly referred to as Sierra or Spartan 117. Dr. Halsey, the one who was heading the Spartan 2 program, is going to have a lot of controversy in how she came to be with the Spartan program, and then you're also going to have a lot of conflict between ONI's interests, the public, but specifically the ODST, or Orbital Drop Shock Troopers. It's going to become a little bit more in depth as we go into the actual behaviors themselves. As I mentioned earlier, diversity is going to be one of those big ones. Through my analysis, I saw that diversity was more of a different mental styles, roles, and military backgrounds. Spartans share similar training, but the UNSC includes Marines, ODST, and naval personnel, and the AI entities. This could be a very large, very broad spectrum of things, I guess I could say. The UNSC, the reason why the diversity came to put into this is because the UNSC needs specialized soldiers to originally was actually to combat human rebellion in our colonies. Now, this has been happening far before the Spartan 2 program came into play. The reason why it's called Spartan 2 is because, for a little bit of background, the Orion project, or the Spartan 1 project, was humanity's first attempt to be making super soldiers, so to speak. And as we saw actually at the beginning of these clips, the one walking with Master Chief, known as Sergeant Avery Johnson, he was actually one of the soldiers part of the Orion project. Now, the project didn't exactly yield the results that ONI was hoping for, but instead it just basically made them more numb to certain scenarios, combat, etc., etc. Now, here's the thing though. Jumping back into the present of the movie, this, if I remember correctly, was about 20 to 50 years, give or take. Let's just say 50 years. I know that doesn't make sense. Johnson's looking pretty good for being well over 50 years old. But that's the kicker. The only other bonus side effect to it is the aging progress had been basically halted and making it to where they don't age as rapidly. Same thing happened in the Spartan 2 program, but again, I digress. It's not the whole moral of the story. You will see Johnson appearing with Dr. Halsey and several other major higher-ups in the Navy itself coming in to watch these new Spartan 2 candidates. Now here's where the controversy comes in, is that they are all children. Yes, you heard that correctly. And no, these were not volunteers, these were not orphans, parents didn't volunteer them. In the movie and in multiple books, especially in the book itself, explicitly went into detail about how Oni and Dr. Halsey went in and essentially kidnapped these children, 400 children specifically, that met specific genomes for the Spartan 2 program. And in their place, to not cause sudden panic, they used what was known as flash clones. These flash clones were not meant to actually be perfect replacements. They would actually ultimately all die off in some form of catastrophic health failure, whether it was cardiac arrest, aneurysms, etc., etc. Very, very controversial, very morally questioning, but that's just how this went. Now, another thing is that Halsey's push for uniformity is where she was ultimately focusing on these specific genotypes. Now, with these genomes, it made it very difficult, very hard on all these kids. But as Dr. Halsey was, they made it very clear. As well as the military culture emphasizing on conformity, trying to conform to these very unusual, very controversially and morally wrong decisions. Now, the impacts, though, did have high adhesion, I guess, or no, adhesion. I would say probably higher compatibility among Spartans. Though there was one big tension. Amongst this, the ODST and Spartan tension due to stereotypes that ODST were dropping in what's known as drop pods, and their nickname was also known as Hell Jumpers. Now, they felt threatened with these, basically at this time, teenagers basically coming in after the procedure known as augmentation. Again, this is where a lot of very cruel words to say, culling of the Spartan 2 candidates happened. These ODSTs saw them as nothing but kids, but they also saw them as threats, freaks, and just not right with this entire everything. One recommendation, though, I would have to mend this diversity is by implementing a cross-unit collaboration program amongst the Spartans, the military Marines, the naval, and the Spartan 2 programs. This way that they could understand what these Spartan 2s were when coming in. Now, here's the thing. It's not going to end well. Unfortunately, they also never actually implemented this. They just said, hey, here's Spartans, they're kids, and they're really strong. Unfortunately, that didn't go over too well. In the movie, it will be seen that while not long after augmentation, John, or CR-117, was going to the training hall to basically work out, test his new augmentation, just to see how his body will react. There's several ODST soldiers out of uniform there also working out. They decide to pick a fight amongst that, and ultimately, because of the augmentation, the enhanced reflexes, strength, durability, enhanced bone strength, density, etc., he did ultimately kill one of them and broke several bones of the others. Now, let's try to get into a little bit different area. Let's head over to the groups and teams aspect of this. Blue team. This is essentially Sierra 117's team. He is considered the leader of the team, and the other four are the same exact, or basically the same Spartan 2s that he went through augmentation and survived with. In blue team, this shows traits of high performance, trust, defined roles, and interdependence. I know I'm using big words. I'm trying to use big words to sound smarter. Bite me. Childhood training. As I said before, though, these children were all basically starting the Spartan 2 program at the age 11. Even going into high stakes missions, there's all kind of stuff. Their whole right off the get-go, they're put straight into harsh training. They were put straight into solely like military strategies, coordination, tactics, combat training, live ammo combat training, etc. There was a scene in there that did show that they were dropped basically straight into the wilderness and told to reach an objective. They were unaware that there was actually an ODST operation happening in there, and through this teamwork, not only with the blue team but with all the candidates at their young age, no augmentation, just sole training and knowledge, they essentially used a wolf pack formation and essentially picked off this entire ODST unit that was doing their own training in there, and basically picked them off, and also ultimately either killing or restraining the vast majority of them. Now, in terms of high stakes missions, though, there's also, I know I keep jumping back and forth between timelines. That's just how I am. It doesn't make sense, but bear with me. After augmentation, blue team, plus I believe there was one more, I cannot remember his name, but there was actually a group of 5 of them at the time. They went in to basically neutralize an insurrection leader that had been hiding out and basically stealing, raiding cargo ships, and importing a lot of luxury goods. They were sent in to neutralize him, and they did succeed in doing so. That was their first mission, but this was before they had what you see in the gameplay, the Mjolnir armor. That's what Master Chief is known, and which is also what made him be able to survive that impact hitting that ship. Yes, if obviously I muted the video, but with Johnson right there in the background, his exact words were, and I quote, "For a brick, he flew pretty good." That is one of the best lines in this game, hands down. Anyway, I digress. I will say, though, some impacts with this great teamwork, though, did have exceptional, what was that word? Cohesion, I believe it was, with this whole unit. Also, possible unity, that's the word, possible unity between all of them. Recommendation, use after action reviews to reduce overthinking groupthinks and basically make it to where you can make a lot more stronger. Hey, if we come across this, here's what we should do this time around, instead of trying to do what we did and make it more efficient, fast, quick, easy. Let's move on to my third topic. The attributes of stereotyping, attribution, and discrimination. Arbitration. There we go. Oni did rationalize unethical actions. ODSTs stereotype Spartans as unfeeling machines. Yes, it is very, very heavily implemented that Spartans are usually seen as nothing but military hardware. That is not good. Seeing them as desensitized, which in a sense, people will see this as, yes, they were desensitized. They can go dropping straight into combat, firing these weapons, being put into these almost impossible scenarios, and just walk it off like it's nothing. The problems with this stereotyping, though, is that it's obviously never all 100% true. Is there some stereotyping that is true? Yes, but not a lot of it. The discrimination, ODSTs have and still do discriminate against Spartans. Even if you were to jump into current lore time, there is still animosity between them. Or mostly on the ODST side, but still. Impacts, I would say there was massive inter-organization hostility and identity strain for Spartans, because Spartans, though they are told they are part of the military, they are never welcomed as truly part of it. Eventually they're seen as these heroes, these super soldiers, but at the beginning they were just seen as overpowered, unusually and unnecessarily strong freaks, to be putting it bluntly. Communications, Spartans, let me reverse. Recommendation, increase transparency and reduce misunderstanding and stereotyping amongst the units. Again, this did not exactly happen until later, when journalists did start to investigate and the truth came to be. There isn't really much of a easy fix on this one. In organizational behavior, this would be something that would be very easy to fix. I remember that you always want to be transparent. You do not want to be hiding, because the more you hide as a company, the more likelihood you're going to be found out and have the rug pulled out from underneath you. Simple as that. Let's head on to my fourth topic, communication. Spartans. Yes, Spartans communicate very well amongst other Spartans. They communicate with the military. They communicate very easily. So they do not hide a lot of stuff. Though they may be told to, they still don't. Let's look at on another one of the players in this movie, called Oni. Oni is essentially similar to what the CIA is in our timeline. Office of Naval Intelligence, and their name intelligence, they like to restrict information, keep the information always top secret. That's why the Spartan program was hidden throughout the entire process of it, and nothing ever got leaked until the very later stages. Though the impacts of this would be inefficiencies and preventable casualties. So when it came to the Oni, they always kept the information secret, which unfortunately did lead to a lot of casualties. Anyway, after all these casualties, it didn't really impact a lot. Spartans, though, they did clarity improves mission success. So while being told, like I said earlier, to be very secretive and whatnot, in here they came across hunters. That's what you saw in the video just now. They communicate with the Marines, even though you have these 7-foot tall humans that literally seem like giants at the time. They still jump right into the action. They will communicate immediately, keep in contact with the ground, and keep everything going. Recommendation, create structured, shared briefing systems. This could help ensure that less loss of life. Unfortunately, these Marines had already died in the video, crash from earlier in the video. But by keeping a structured, shared briefing system, it makes it a lot easier. Let's go to number 5, emotions and moods. Spartans just keep their emotions. They don't show their emotions at all. This is usually, and this hasn't been confirmed, but has been in other books, that Spartans are implemented with an emotion inhibitor. It basically reduces or inhibits certain chemical compounds that usually helps bring out certain emotions, dopamine, all the other stuff. Though John, the Spartan that we were discussing here, he does feel responsibility, fear, grief. Marines show resentment, admiration, and envy towards the Spartans. And John feels responsibility, fear, and grief. If you were to watch the movie, he does slight fear, but the grief is primarily when he loses one of the 5 group members of the Spartan team that stayed behind later in the movie to sacrifice himself to essentially complete the mission. Even though he visibly did not show it, he did feel the grief of the loss. Fear, again, in the video games, even in the books, he does not show signs of the fear, but that fear is still relevant. It is still visible. Anyway, implications. Ignoring emotional labor, weakness, and long-term resilience. That is basically what their training was about. They were ensuring that they were being kept under constant labor, emotional labor, physical labor, which helped with that numbing effect. Some would say that has broken them at their core, but anybody can become numbed to these effects. Recommendation: introducing psychological support protocols. This actually was done, so to speak, was actually implementing AI, not really companions, but tools that, again, fully functioning, basically no different than talking to a normal human. For Master Chief or 0117 or John, that's where Cortana came into play. She basically helps him complete his missions more efficiently, there to help with communications, and makes it to where he doesn't feel or seem like he's just this lone soldier, this alone in his head, in his armor, the entire time. Let's head up to number 6, my leadership. Here we go. All right. So John, his leadership was very transformative, transformational, so to speak. His leadership was not there from the get-go. He asked the questions in the movie. He asked, what would it be to become the leader? What does he need to do? Always striving to try to become better, try to figure out what it means to be an actual leader. And he actually did this, going from not knowing to taking the initiative during the forced exercise. He took hold of the leadership position without actually trying to become the leader. And then ultimately he just kind of fell into that leadership position. People were relying on him. People were looking to him for advice, for, again, the leadership itself. And and whatnot. Dr. Halsey was more of an authoritarian and visionary. She was always a my way, highway kind of personality in leadership. And her visions was always looking for what could be improved towards humanity, or the Spartans, or just overall improvement. Now let's look at Captain Keyes. I know, first time name drop on him, but Captain Keyes was there at the beginning of the movie, accompanying Dr. Halsey to where these children were, and to observe them, talk to them, communicate with them, etc., etc., etc. But he was more of the ethical backbone. He always saw the ethical issues. He was trying to figure out what could and could not be the ethical dilemmas, etc. But he was also the servant, so to speak. By this I meant he was there solely as the escort for Dr. Halsey, not really there to give advice, but there to essentially just ensure quote unquote safety and compliance. Obviously, that went right out the window when it came to kidnapping children. Impacts, though, I would say the leadership style directly shapes moral and mission outcomes. So having a more solid, more well put together leader ensures mission outcomes to be successful. Recommendation, I would say a balanced mission success with ethical responsibility. This makes it to where it doesn't make it as harsh or, again, ethically problematic, so to speak. Now let's go to personality and values. Spartans do differ in personality, but share a duty revolving around the same values. Halsey's utilitarian values conflict with ethical norms. One way I would say that this was a bit more of on the problematic, though, is that she was more on always progression, trying to evolve the human race as a species, which she believes very, very strongly that the Spartan 2 program is that next step. Recommendations: use ethical review boards in decision making. That didn't really stop her at all. Didn't stop Oni. The only time that this was actually forcibly put into place was actually because the truth came about of how Spartans came to be. Obviously, in a business aspect, yes, this is a very easy thing to do, but in this one where you're in the middle of a war, you're desperate, a lot of ethical decisions, a lot of ethical problems kind of get shoved to the side in favor of trying to save millions, actually probably at this point in time was billions of lives. Let's head over to number 8, power. Halsey was technically the main and top power of this entire thing. This could, however, what was it? Expert and cohesive, I think? I don't know. Basically, her power was being the expert in her field, the expert of the Spartan program, and she knew exactly how and what to do. This made it really hard for people to question because she's the only one with the knowledge and know-how of how these things work. Other people otherwise wouldn't. UNSC was more legitimate in terms of power. They are seen as the true military power in terms of, keeping the balance, making sure that the war is being fought and whatnot. To where Spartans, they were seen as this almost unnatural superhuman power. They had no real, military decision-making power, nor did they have any real political power. They were solely just, again, pure power. Muscle, strength, just pure power. Unfortunately, there really wasn't much of an offset in powers. They were all in their own respectful rights, but there was still the standard military hierarchy. Halsey ignored everything. The UNSC gave orders, and Spartans still actually listened and received those orders and executed them properly. Impacts. The big powers that Halsey had did lead to unethical decisions, and the Spartans, how was it? I looked it up. Referent power basically inspires troops. I guess I would say revered power. Essentially, though, they were basically looked up to as like these beings of almighty, but not really having this divine power to them. Recommendations shift towards a competency-based power or ethical authority structures. This one probably was a lot more feasible, but again, during the time they were in the middle of a very, very threatening galactic war against the army known as the Covenant, that sole goal is to wipe humanity off the entire universe while humanity is just surviving, no rhyme or reason. Let's head over to number 9, perception. Civilians basically they see Spartans as nothing but mythical until they actually see one. Military sees them as assets and only sees them as tools. Okay, and let's dig into this one just a bit. So civilians, 90% of civilians in the entire Halo universe will never see a Spartan a day in their life. That's because they can be advertised, Spartans are, superhumans, the next big thing. But many of them say, oh, that's just military propaganda. They aren't real. So that's why they are seen as a form of myth. The military sees them as assets, which is a valid reason. They unfortunately don't see them as humans. Same thing as Oni, they don't see them as humans. But they have given them a little bit more humility. Again, the military knows that there's a human in there. They talk to them, they communicate, they help out, they are responsive, and they will adjust and listen to other sides of the problems, etc. Now, when it comes to Oni, though, they just see a tool. They just see a machine. They don't see a human. They don't see another person in there. They solely just see a tool to be told, hey, go do this, come back, you're done. Impacts, there was a lot of dehumanization of Spartans because of this mythical view, these assets, and the tools of all three of these, seeing the Spartans, they are fully dehumanized. That's where a very, very famous quote or question between John and Cortana, his AI partner, always are saying, only one of us is the machine. You need to figure out who it is. Because John himself, in his, quote, broken state, he sees himself as nothing more than a machine to be used in this war. As well, there's also identity conflicts. Yes, you heard me right. Spartans are seen as having a lot of identity crisis. They do not understand a lot of what's happening. But some of them do find their identity, but many will never find their identity solely because it has been basically ripped out of them. Recommendation: promote accurate representation of the military units. We do not want to see the Spartans as basically seen as just military or mythical creatures. You want to make sure that they are still seen as human beings. If you don't see them as human beings, then that's where problems arise. All right, next is my conflict. Okay. Types. I got 3 types here. Interpersonal. This is basically going to be the ODST and the Spartans. ODST has nothing but disdain towards Spartans. Spartans just want to, not have conflict, but the ODST keeps bringing that conflict to the Spartans because of what happened at the beginning of the one ODST being killed and most of them being beaten. There's intra-group types of conflict. Spartans coping with losses. So Spartans can have a lot of problems with the loss of either fellow Spartans, teammates, those in the groups of the kids before they went to augmentation. Because like I said, out of the 400 Spartan 2 candidates that was brought in during augmentation and at the end of augmentation, out of 400, only 30. Yeah, only 30 survived the augmentation process. Obviously, it was not a very safe procedure, very dangerous, very risky, but unfortunately also did yield the best results in terms. And now then you have inter-organization, which would be the ONI versus the Navy, the UNSC as a whole. ONI was always keeping secretive. They were trying to eliminate those who would, leak their secrets, etc., etc., etc. Toward the Navy was trying to be transparent with the public, the rest of the military, etc. But these two very big powers just kept clashing heads together over and over again. A big problem with this was resource scarcity. and stereotypes happening with these conflicts. Resource scarcity was basically, the assets, funding, and resources being allocated towards whichever one had the bigger pull on this tug of war. Stereotypes, conflict, again, so many stereotypes happening when it comes to Spartans being inhuman, and it was just a very unpleasant happening. Recommendation, I would use interest-based negotiation strategies. Instead of just having nothing but no interests that would help coordinate with each other, I would try to find a way to negotiate between these two groups and ultimately find a common ground, find a common denominator right here. Let's head over to number 11. That would be motivation. Spartans rely on intrinsic motivation, basically duty, belonging, and purpose. Impacts for this would be high performance but risk of burnout. There really is no risk of burnout. They are basically always going in there. Normal organizations, yes, but for Spartans, it is just another day. Go in, insert yourself, complete the mission, extract, you're home free. Recommendation, I would try to develop long-term well-being and development programs. Basically, instead of just, saying suck it up or having Spartans go and, with just, hey, here, insert an AI companion and hope for the best, that I would not recommend that. I would recommend very long-term coping mechanisms, or even or even better programs. Anyway, let's head over to number 12, the final one, organizational structure. So the UNSC was always a very rigid military traditional hierarchy, as our current military usually is. ONI, though, was flexible but very secretive, very intelligent structure. They're more on the hush-hush, kind of like what our current CIA is. Everything keeps secret. No one gets to have all the data that they ask for. Everything, it can be swept under the rug, and if you ask about it, you very quietly and suddenly disappear, and everyone will pretend you never existed. That's how ONI's base works. For the UNSC, if you've ever seen how our current military is, that is how it is structured. Very clear, very defined, end of story. Now, let's see these impacts. The UNSC, the impacts of this was discipline but slow innovation. They been reusing these same tools, same kinetic-based weapons, which actually are very effective during this war, but ultimately sometimes can have drawbacks. Limited quantity, not enough on hand of supplies, etc. ONI was all about innovation, but those ethical violations, kidnapping, as we're seeing right now. This is actually, the current video is actually showing exactly how this was set up. Young children put in the pods after being kidnapped. You have Dr. Halsey being interviewed from actually an outsourced reporter. Yes, she's in handcuffs because she was charged with all those kidnappings, essentially. Anyway, this was all because ONI, all these augmentations, all the chemicals being pumped in to help basically boost them to turn into these super soldiers. As you can see, there is a very clear result, but if these ethical violations hadn't come to play, then as you just saw, that massive ship that was coming down from orbit with all those hundreds and hundreds of ships is basically the Covenant coming and basically killing innocent civilians. Here comes the Spartans, almost seen as unheard of, solely coming in and the only ones that can actually hold the ground to this Covenant. Recommendations, though, I would say adopt a hybrid structure with decentralized tactical authority. This makes it to where you can still get away with some things, but a lot of it you can't. There's still some form of hold, kind of like how our current, I would say, our government, where you have the checks and balances. That's how I'd say it. Checks and balances is how I would see this. So I would just conclude this is Halo the Fall of Reach demonstrates how leadership, communication, and motivation, team cohesion, and power dynamics, as well as organizational structure, drives outcomes in high-pressure environments. Strong team cohesion and transformational leadership fuel success, while secrecy and despising and high power and rigid structures create ethical and operational failures. This has been my analogy for Halo, the Fall of Reach movie with organizational behavior. I thank you for your time. Thank you.